You're listening to Engage Arizona, Public Policy for Daily Life. In this episode, we speak with Jason Bedrick, Director of Policy at EdChoice, a national nonprofit organization focused on empowering parents to choose the best learning environment for their children. Jason takes on the biggest criticisms from opponents, including accountability and funding. And now, here's Cindy Dahlgren.
All right, I'm Cindy Dahlgren with Engage Arizona and Center for Arizona Policy. We're talking school choice today with Jason Bedrick, Director of Policy at EdChoice, which is a very helpful website, by the way, for those searching for answers on various school choice programs. Thanks for joining us today, Jason. We hope to clear up some confusion, answer some questions on details that have been widely misrepresented in the mainstream media. Jason, appreciate your time. Probably the biggest complaint we hear about, either expanding the empowerment scholarship accounts or other school choice programs, is that they take money away from public schools. Briefly explain, if you would, how ESAs are funded. Most of the money follows the student for the most part. Is that true?
That's right. First, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you and the work that your organization does to expand educational opportunity here in Arizona. I live in Phoenix, although I work for a national organization that works to advance educational choice across the country. With the ESA program, which is a form of what's called an education savings account program, this is different, I should note, from the 529 plans or Coverdell college saving plans. In Arizona, they're called empowerment scholarship accounts. What they actually do is they take 90% of the state portion of per pupil funding and put it into an account. Now, just to be clear, students in district schools are funded via three places. Their local school district, right, so local property taxes and whatnot, from the state government and from the federal government. The federal government only spends, on average, nationally about 8% of that per pupil expenditure comes from the feds. Most are coming from the state or from the locality. So here we're only talking about that state portion. So 90% of those funds will follow the child into a private restricted use bank account that families can use for certain educational expenses. So private school tuition, but also things like tutoring, textbooks, homeschool curricula, online learning, educational therapy, especially since about 2/3 of the students participating in the program are students with special needs. Educational therapy is a very large expense. But they're only tapping into that 90% of the state portion. All of the local funding, when a child leaves a school district for any reason whatsoever, all of the local funding stays, the federal funding stays, and the only thing that changes is the per pupil allocation from the state government.
Okay, so it would seem like if they're getting 90% of just the state portion, what is that, about $500, $600 roughly?
So it comes out to about 5,000.
I'm sorry, 1,000. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yes, and that's for a typical child, and a little bit more, closer to 6,000 for a low income child, and then students with special needs. It varies depending on which special need they have. So Arizona actually has one of the better funding formulas when it comes to special needs, in that the state picks up most of the special needs tab. I don't know off the top of my head all of the different amounts, so I'll make up some. But just so you have an idea, a student with autism might be getting 18,000. A student with blindness might be getting 20,000, whereas a student that has, a less expensive disability might be getting 12,000. But whatever the amount is, it's still 90% of what the state would have been spending at the district school. So it does vary considerably for students with special needs. And then for students that don't have an IEP, that don't have special needs, then it would be about $5,500 to $5,900.
Okay, and so, but then the local money and the federal money stays in that district. So if somebody if a child is in a public school and then they choose an ESA and go to, say, a private school or homeschooling or something like that, then the district is left with some money anyway that they have no child attached to. So
That's right. And it's just like any other operation, we should recognize that there are fixed costs and there are variable costs. So, that we think of buildings, let's say, as a fixed cost, but there are a whole bunch of variable costs that are associated with a student in that school. When it comes to things like transportation, even to some extent teachers, the food that they provide, all of these things are variable costs. And really, in the long run, even there are no all fixed costs are variable costs in the long run, because if there were long run trends in one direction or another, you can acquire new buildings or you can sell off unused buildings. So all different types of schools and other organizations are constantly making adjustments based on changes in enrollment, or for a business, changes in purchases from customers. These things are necessary, and it's an important part of the market is the ability to adapt to changing circumstances.
Correct. So talk a little bit about what the benefits would be to a public school when one of the students moves from a public school to a private school environment, or uses one of the school choice programs to do so.
I think the most important way to think of these things is that we really have to be thinking about the children first and the system second, right? It's the system is designed for the child, not the other way around. So I sometimes hear people make the argument, when this child leaves, they're taking money away from the school. Well, that money was allocated for the child, and the child is not owed to the school system. Right? It's sort of inverting our priorities. We should really be focused on what is best for this particular child. How can we get this child into the environment that is best suited to meet his or her needs, and not the other way around? And so a system that had more child-centric funding, let's say some people call backpack funding, where the money follows the child, really benefits the children. And we actually see that as Arizona has moved to a more child-centric system of funding, in other words, has moved to a system of greater school choice, we have actually seen dramatic improvements in our performance on the national NAEP exams. That's the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is often referred to as the nation's report card. So right now, at least in Maricopa County, where about more than 80% of the population in Arizona lives, we have seen that. So right now, more than 50% of students are in a school that is outside of their assigned school, and so that means they're either in a charter school that they chose, or a magnet school, or they're using the inter-district choice program. They're enrolling in a district school that they're not assigned to somewhere else, or they're using either tax credits or tax credit scholarships or education savings accounts to choose a private school, or even some combination of private schooling, homeschooling, tutoring, etc. And in this incredible choice environment, we have actually seen dramatic improvement on our NAEP scores. Arizona in 2015 was the only state that had statistically significant gains in all 6 of the NAEP exams. So NAEP has exams in 4th grade for math and reading, also in 8th grade, and then math, reading, and science, I should say, for 4th and 8th grade. The national average for public schools was to see gains in between 1 and 4 of those exams. To see gains of points of about 1 to 4 points in those exams. In Arizona, the district schools improved by about 3 to 6, but the charter schools in Arizona improved between 15 and 22 points.
And why do you think that is?
I think it's because the charter sector has the most choice and competition. But we actually, across the entire system, we saw incredible gains. So Arizona's charter school sector is actually performing at the level of schools in New England, just behind like Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but very, very close. The difference is that we're spending about half as much per pupil than they are. And we have our charter sector serves a majority minority population, and they're much lower income than they are in the New England area. So our schools are doing really well. We hear that Arizona is last. Often what they're referring to, when they say 48th, is they're talking about per pupil expenditures that are not adjusted for cost of living nationally. Our students are still, on average, I would say, mediocre relative to other states, but the fastest improving. So that's really important, is the trajectory that you're going. And that's sort of the promise of school choice, is that if parents are empowered to choose the learning environment for their children, they're going to choose environments, choose schools that are higher performing. And then over time, those schools are going to expand. They're going to open, like, for example, we see that Great Hearts takes more students. They're opening up new locations. And then others also copy the success of those schools. And so that what you're looking for is a systemic, incremental improvement over time.
And in the district schools as well?
And the district schools as well. I mean, this is an important part of the process, is that as students move out of those schools, so first of all, like, look at Scottsdale. Scottsdale has a high-performing system, but you've got a lot of parents that are opting out of Scottsdale, and they're sending their kids to Basis or Great Hearts. Well, first of all, that opens up seats in Scottsdale for children in Phoenix that are assigned to lower-performing schools to go to that district, and it also puts pressure on the other school districts to improve their performance as well.
Okay, that makes sense. So, and I know some of the measurable benefits of school choice programs are backed up by several studies, and you were talking a little bit earlier offline about the one out of Florida and some other ones. Tell me a little bit about that.
So there was a study that was just released by the Urban Institute, which is a center-left think tank that was looking at the effect of Florida's tax credit scholarship program on student performance, and particularly actually on student attainment. So we should note, Arizona was the first state to enact the tax credit scholarship program. There are now 18 states that have similar programs. Florida's is by far the largest. They serve about 100,000 students, and those students are all low-income students. The average household income for a family of two is only about $25,000 a year. So these are very low-income students. About 70% of them are Black or Hispanic, and they find that on the students that are switching into the program from a public school have lower scores on average when they enter the program than their peers of a similar demographics. So they're not creaming, they're actually taking students that are on average lower performing. So they're not taking the higher performing students. Although after several years in the program, those students are performing at the national average, which is to say that they are outscoring their demographic peers that are low income. But what this analysis found was that students are significantly more likely, if they participate in the scholarship program, to enroll in college and also to persist in college and to actually attain a bachelor's degree. And they also found that the longer you stay in the program, in other words, the more years of participation that you're using a scholarship to go to a private school, the more likely you are to end up going to college or to go to persist and get a degree. Sometimes those who were using a scholarship for 4 years or more were twice as likely to go to college.
Wow.
So that's great, and they were about 150% as likely to graduate from college.
Wow.
So these are very strong findings, and we see all across the country positive effects, particularly on student attainment, but There have been some mixed effects on the test score side of things, a number of randomized control trials that showed positive effects. Then there were a couple recently in Louisiana that showed slightly negative effects, although those negative effects disappeared over time. But for the whole, what the research shows is that students who are participating in the program tend to perform better academically and are significantly more likely to go to college and actually complete college.
Yeah, well, I know not all the benefits are measurable. Talk a little bit about them and about the problem with only focusing on them, on the matrix.
Yes, so there's a lot more to education than test scores. One of the reasons that I like the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the nation's report card that I discussed earlier, is that schools are not judged by the NAEP. So you can't, what they do is they take a national sample. They take a sample of schools from each state, and then they compare those results. And so you can't actually prepare for the NAEP. There's no incentive for any individual school to change how they operate in order to score better on the NAEP. So there's no carrots and sticks. I think one of the problems is that you're talking about accountability, and there's this confusion that test scores are like the sum total of accountability. Test scores measure one thing. They measure how well you're performing in math at a particular point in time, how well you're performing in language at a particular point in time, and then you can also track that over time. The problem becomes when we start attaching carrots and sticks to these. And we have, in the public school system, I think there's this metric obsession where we are rewarding and punishing schools based on how they're performing on these metrics. Now, what does that do? So if a school is not performing well, and then they're labeled, this is an F school or a D school, right? Nobody wants that label. So there's a number of things they can do to improve. And not all of them are healthy. And so what a lot of schools will end up doing is, okay, well, we're going to spend more time on the measured subjects and less time on the non-measured subjects. So we're going to spend more time on math and more time on English language arts. And we're going to do less time on foreign languages, social studies, art, music, recess, lunch, right? And then for a certain part of the year, we're going to change our curriculum, right? So that the curriculum is geared toward the test. Now, we saw this in California. For example, most eighth grade, in most district schools in California at the eighth grade level were teaching algebra. When California adopted Common Core and algebra is tested in ninth grade, they said, okay, well now we're going to switch it to ninth grade. So they changed around the curriculum, not based on what they think is best for their students, but what they think is going to help them score best on the test.
Right. So the metrics are dictating curriculum.
Right. And then they'll also, in some cases, spend weeks doing drill and kill, just teaching kids how to take a test, right? Test taking strategies as opposed to real learning. So I think when you first implement a testing regime, the test might be measuring something important. They're telling you important things, and I think the NAEP still does that. The problem is once you try to make this the sum total of your accountability system, or even the primary part of your accountability system, the people in the public school system, especially the teachers, they have a very valid point here when they say that this distorts the way we teach children, and not in healthy ways, in very unhealthy ways. So I would say, you hear this argument, the private schools are unaccountable, the public schools are accountable. And what do they mean by that? The private schools don't have to take the state test and the public schools do. I would say, so they're not on equal footing. I would argue the reverse is true. The private schools are far more accountable because they are directly accountable to parents who are empowered to choose their child's school. If your school is doing a good job, and yes, tests are a part of the process, tests provide valuable information, then you're going to attract more students. And if you're not doing a good job, then parents have the option to leave and go somewhere else. That empowers parents. Because before we had these school choice programs, the district schools were so often a monopoly, especially for low-income families that aren't able to afford to live in a school district that has a higher performing public school or to enroll their child in a private school. Because they had a captive audience, they didn't have real accountability because they weren't accountable directly to parents. They were accountable to elected school boards, unelected officials at the state capitol or even in Washington, D.C. And so what we started to do is just pile regulation after regulation after regulation on top of them, like they're a monopoly, like a utility, like a public utility. And we started over time to confuse all those regulations for real accountability. I would say, no, we've lost sight of real accountability. We've gained it back in Arizona with the wide availability of educational choice options. And so the time has come to actually start scaling back on all of the top-down regulations on the district schools. And then, yes, let them compete on even ground with the charters and the privates and all the other options yet to be imagined.
Yeah, you talk about the accountability, and yeah, that's one of the biggest complaints is that, they say that these tax dollars are going to school choice programs and there's no accountability, and that's not fair. And one of the main points that is never talked about is the importance of not holding private schools or any other school choice program to the exact same standards as the public schools. And it's, obviously what you had said about the parents will be the ones that are going to hold them accountable. They're the ones paying the money. They're the ones who actually took the initiative to go after this and look for another option outside of public school. But also if you hold them to the exact same standards, then they start to look a lot like the public schools. And then they're, using the carrot and the stick that you were explaining earlier.
That's right. So what we don't want is a system that says, well, we're going to have every school is going to be McDonald's, but you can choose from the best McDonald's out there, right? And we'll give you all these metrics that you can decide which school is the best McDonald's. But if you're looking for Taco Bell, let alone vegan options or kosher options, you're out of luck. I think that's not the system that we want to go in. That might make sense if we lived in a world in which there was one best way to teach a child, and we knew what it was, and we knew exactly how to design a system that would produce that. But I don't think any of those assumptions actually attain. Different children learn better in different environments. There's no one right way to teach. And the truth is different people have different values. So, yes, everybody, wants some level of math and reading. Obviously, those are essential. But some parents want to focus a little bit more on civics. For others, religious instruction is of supreme importance. Others want their child to have a deep appreciation of the arts and drama and music. And different children have different likes and dislikes. I think it's great. There are some families that have one child who's thriving in a local district school. Another child is at a charter school that focuses on drama. Another one is going to a magnet school that focuses on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think that's great. We should have multiple options, and parents should be able to choose from among them. And if we were to judge all of these schools by exactly the same metrics, again, you're going to dilute the value of choice by creating powerful incentives for these schools to conform to a system that is really just arbitrarily chosen, not the system that's designed to meet particular goals that they want, but designed only, it would be inverting those priorities, and they would be designing their system to do well on the test as opposed to achieve some educational objective.
Now, we could talk about this for a long time, I'm sure, but we're slowly running out of time. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say anything else that you think is important that people listening would be interested in hearing.
I'll give a pitch for the EdChoice website, edchoice.org. You can find out lots of information about school choice programs in your states and how they compare to school choice programs across the country. We also, we gather tons of information about these programs, how many students are participating, what the value of the scholarships are, what regulations are imposed on the programs. We also have information about all of the different research that has been conducted by different universities and think tanks on school choice. Lots of information on the website. But the most important thing is, as parents, you should find out about these programs so that you know what is available when you're trying to educate your children. There are many, many different options out there, and you want to arm yourself with the best knowledge, the best information available for you to choose wisely for your kid's future.
Great. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Jason Bedrick, Director of Policy at EdChoice. Thanks for correcting some of the misinformation out there and shining some light on frequently overlooked benefits of school choice programs. I'm sure we'll be talking again with you soon as these issues continue to be battled out at the state legislature. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for having me.